Okay guys, so sit back and enjoy because it is time for the second annual Casting Olympics. Now last year in the first annual Casting Olympics, we had a total of 6 reels competing against each other. But this year it's actually much bigger than that because we have a total of 10 reels competing in this year's Olympics. Now before I show you guys all the reels that are competing, let me explain a little bit more about the Casting Olympics and what the purpose of this battle is. Now of course we are wanting to get a winner, but the main point of the Casting Olympics is to include reels of all brands and all different brake systems. That means as long as each reel I feel has the potential to compete and win, then it doesn't matter what brand it comes from, whether it be, a $600 Shimano DC reel or some cheap $40 AliExpress baitcaster. So that means there is no price limit. So that keeps this from being, a bunch of Shimanos and Daiwas fighting against each other. And like I said, I want to include reels of all different brake systems. So that actually means that reels that have been discontinued and are no longer being made also are eligible to compete. Once again, as long as I think they have the potential to win. Now the reel you see in front of you was the winner of last year's Casting Olympics, and that is a 2016 Shimano ANTARES DC. Now what's strange about this reel is that it barely made it out of the first round, but once it got into the championship round, it easily stomped on all the other reels to take the win. Now this year's Olympics, the focus is going to be a little bit different, so the 2016 ANTARES DC is not going to be competing. And what I mean by that is that last year's Olympics focused on heavier weights and heavier lures. Now this time around, we're going to be focusing on more finesse weights and finesse lures. So yeah, the 2016 ANTARES DC is not going to be in this battle despite being last year's champion. Okay, so let's take a moment to go over this year's format. Now just like last year, we're going to have 2 rounds, the main round and then the championship round. But unlike last year, I'm going to try to make this all into one video. Now the reel you see in front of you is the current 1/4 ounce casting plug king, and that is the 2020 Shimano METANIUM MGL, a reel that really surprised me with its casting performance. Now because of the fact that it is the 1/4 ounce casting plug king, the METANIUM MGL automatically advances into the championship round. So that means the other 9 reels are going to have to battle each other, and the top 3 reels are going to move to the championship round and challenge the METANIUM MGL. Now the first round is going to be all the other reels throwing the 1/4 ounce casting plug to see which 3 come out on top. And then in the championship round, I really haven't decided yet what lure I'm going to throw, but it's going to be a real lure. But I'll let you guys know after the initial round is over. But now it's time to get on to the other 9 contestants. Okay, so the first contestant, which is no big surprise, and representing Daiwa, is the new 2021 ZILLION 1000. Now coincidentally, the ZILLION has already went up against the METANIUM in a cast battle recently, where it got its ass kicked, but triggering several fanboys in the process. So the new 2021 ZILLION 1000 gets a chance at revenge against the METANIUM. Now the spool weight for the ZILLION is going to be roughly 11 grams. It's 34 millimeters in diameter, so average size. And the braking system is going to be a dynamic magnetic system in the form of Daiwa's proprietary SV Boost. Now the pros for the ZILLION is that it is relatively lightweight at around 6 ounces. It's going to be sporting that SV Boost system, which is supposed to extend the casting distance of the SV spool, and of course it's got the T-Wing line guide, which is the biggest line guide here by far. Now the cons for this reel, and this is just my opinion, is that it is still an SV spool. So next up, representing Abu Garcia, is the JDM REVO D's 8. Now the REVO D's is sporting the lightest spool here, tied with another reel at only 8.2 grams, and it is 32 millimeters in diameter. Now the braking system on the REVO D's is going to be a static magnetic system in the form of, I believe, the MagTrax 3. Now the pros for the REVO D's is going to be that it is the lightest reel here, and the cons are that the spool is on the smaller side compared to some others here as well. So the second contestant is the JDM Abu Garcia REVO D's 8. So the next reel is going to be a Korean domestic market reel called the Doyo Liger 30. But in case you didn't know, this is the exact same reel as the American market LEWS Custom Light. So I guess this is representing both Doyo and LEWS at the same time. Now the Liger 30 is tied with the REVO D's for having the lightest spool here at 8.2 grams, and it is a very small 30 millimeters. Now the braking system on the Liger 30 is going to be a centrifugal system that is a flying arm type with external adjustment. Now the pros for the Doyo Liger are going to be that it is very lightweight. I believe it's the second lightest reel here, and of course we have that really lightweight spool, and then of course we have the very fine-tunable externally adjustable centrifugal brakes. Now I really only found one con to this reel, and that is the fact that the spool is the smallest here at only 30 millimeters. So basically that means it's going to have to work much harder than the bigger spools to achieve the same distance, but maybe those brakes will work some kind of magic. But once again, the Doyo Liger 30, aka the LEWS Custom Light. Okay, so next up is the JDM Shimano SLX DC70. So basically we went from the most expensive DC reel in last year's Olympics to the most affordable DC reel in this year's Olympics. Now the SLX DC70 sports an average 34 millimeter spool, but it is the heaviest spool here by far at a whopping 21.3 grams. Now it's going to be sporting Shimano's proprietary electromagnetic DC brakes that are controlled by a digital chip in the form of the IDC4 brake system. Now as far as the pros for the SLX DC, I really only have one, and that of course is going to be its DC brakes. Now the cons for the SLX DC is going to be once again that really heavy spool, and the fact that this reel is heavy itself, and I think it's probably the heaviest reel in this contest. And then the last con is that despite having the most advanced brakes here, they are limited to only 4 settings, so it's going to be really tough to dial in this reel for maximum distance, especially with that light 1/4 ounce casting plug. So moving right along, the next reel seems to get a lot of hate for some reason, and I'm not sure if it's because of the reel itself or the company that makes it, but representing 13 Fishing is going to be the Concept Boss. Now the Concept Boss is sporting a 32 millimeter finesse style spool that weighs in at 11.2 grams approximately. As far as the brake system goes, it's sporting an internally adjustable only 6-way centrifugal brake system. Now the pros for the Concept Boss are going to be the fact that it is probably the smallest reel here size wise, and it's probably got the shallowest spool here as well. And the big selling point for the Concept Boss is going to be the fact that it's sporting the CZB polymer bushings, the second generation. That is supposed to be an improvement over the previous generation. So hopefully those will help this reel in this contest, because in last year's Olympics, the original Concept Z didn't fare too well. And the only con on this reel is the fact that it has a very limited amount of brake adjustment. So making its Casting Olympics debut is going to be KASTKING with the Speed Demon Elite. Now the spool on the Speed Demon Elite is going to be 32mm in diameter, so on the smaller side, and it's going to weigh 11.7 grams. So normally that's pretty light, but in this company that's kind of mid-pack. Now the braking system is going to be an internally and externally adjustable centrifugal brake system that uses pins instead of flying arms. Now the pros for the Speed Demon Elite is that once again it has that lightweight spool, and the brakes are very fine-tunable to dial in for max distance. Now the cons for the Speed Demon Elite is the fact that the spool is smaller at 32mm and it holds a lot of line, so that may negate a lot of that lightweight spool. And despite having really fine-tunable brakes, another con is going to be the fact that I find the brakes to be pretty finicky from my experience. But once again, we have the KASTKING Speed Demon Elite, proving that the Casting Olympics is open to all brands. Okay, so next up we have another company making its debut in the Casting Olympics, and that is going to be PISCIFUN with the Phantom. Now the Phantom is sporting a 12.6 gram 36mm spool, and as far as the braking system goes, this is sporting a dual hybrid system featuring internally adjustable centrifugal brakes with externally adjustable magnetic brakes for fine tuning. Now the pros for the Phantom is the fact that it's going to have the tallest spool here by far. The spool is light and the brakes are very fine tunable. You have a lot of adjustments to dial in the Phantom. Now the cons are that even though the spool is light by normal standards, in this company they're considered mid-pack amazingly. And the fact that I believe that this spool has the most line capacity. So that's definitely going to work against the fact that the spool is relatively light. Okay, so next up we have yet another Daiwa in the form of the long discontinued T3 Ballistic. Now the T3 Ballistic is sporting a 34mm diameter spool that weighs in at about 16.5 grams. Now the braking system is probably the most advanced brake system that Daiwa has ever created in the form of the MagForce 3D dynamic system. Now the pros for the T3 Ballistic is the fact that it is sporting a T-wing just like the ZILLION, and the biggest pro in my opinion for the T3 is going to be that 3D brake system, because it's got 3 main settings that you can choose from, and then within those 3 settings you have an external dial with 20 additional settings for fine tunability. So the 3D brake system has about 60 settings you can choose from to really help you dial in your casting distance. Now the cons for the T3 Ballistic is the fact that the reel itself is pretty heavy. It's about the same weight as the SLX DC, and the spool is heavy in this company. In fact, it's the second heaviest spool here, and it does hold quite a bit of line, as you can see how deep it is. And then the last con for the T3 Ballistic is its awkward casting ergonomics. So I don't know if you guys have ever casted a T3, but it's got that pop-up hood and it kind of feels weird. Okay, so just like last year, the final contestant in this Casting Olympics is going to be a mystery reel. Now the only information I'm going to give you about this reel is that it has a form of static magnetic braking. But you're not going to know what it is until we get to the results. Now before we get onto the casting field, we're going to finish off with the METANIUM MGL. Now this reel is sporting a 12.5 gram 34mm diameter spool. Now the braking system is going to be a proprietary Shimano internally and externally adjustable flying arm centrifugal system called SVS Infinity. Now the pros for this reel is that the fact that it is very small. It's probably just as small as the Concept Boss, and it's got great casting ergonomics. And another pro is that the spool capacity is going to probably be the second shallowest here. And another pro is going to be that it has a oversized cone-shaped tapered line guide. It's probably the second biggest line guide here behind the Daiwas that have the T-wing system. Now the cons are that the spool, despite being only 12.5 grams, is still one of the heavier spools here. And another con is that despite having an oversized line guide, the line guide is very, very close to the spool. Now once again, the METANIUM is not going to be participating in this first round, it's going to be participating in the championship round. So let's get out on the field and see what happens. Okay, so all the casts are done and all the calculations have been made. So it's time to find out which 3 reels get to move on to the final championship round to challenge the mighty METANIUM MGL. Now before we get to the results, I just wanted to say that since there were so many reels, I limited the number of casts to 3, and I didn't spend 30 minutes trying to dial in each reel to get the last millimeter of casting performance. But I think I did a great job dialing in all these reels in such a short amount of time. Alright, let's get to the results. Now since there were so many reels in this battle, there were quite a few surprises. And this is the first surprise, and that's coming in last place is the Doyo Liger 30, aka the LEWS Custom Light. And this reel averaged 129.19 feet. Now I didn't expect the Liger to win, but I did expect it to put up better numbers than 129 foot average. Now the spool tension on this reel was set to just minimize side-to-side play, and I was actually able to go down pretty low on the brakes, down to number 2, as you can see. But unfortunately, this braking system is not great for, you know, really fine-tuning the last bit of casting distance out of a reel. And once again, this very small spool at 30 millimeters definitely held it back. Now I do feel that if you have one of these reels, putting in a set of hybrid ceramics will probably add a few feet to your cast distance. But coming in 9th place is the Doyo Liger 30. Okay, so coming in 8th place, and this might be quite a shock to a lot of you guys, that's going to be the JDM Shimano SLX DC with an average of 141.72 feet. Now, this reel was a reel that I did not expect to win, but I thought it would do better than 141 foot average. Now, the brake setting for the SLX DC was spool tension set to just minimize the side-to-side play, and the external dial was set to 2. I was not able to go down to number 1, but once again, this has got the heaviest spool here by far, so really not surprised with the results of the SLX DC coming in 8th place. Just thought it would cast longer than 141 foot average. So coming in 7th place, and this was kind of a surprise as well, as I thought it would do better, it's going to be the discontinued Daiwa T3 Ballistic. And the T3 Ballistic averaged 144.77 feet, and I really thought this reel would be able to crack the 150 foot average mark, but unfortunately the spool once again is the second heaviest here, and it does hold quite a bit of line. Now, the brake setting for the T3 Ballistic was spool tension set to just minimize side-to-side play, and backed off 1 click. Now, with the T3 Ballistic, unfortunately, I guess with such a light plug, I was not able to engage the long cast. The all-around mode was the lowest brake mode I could go into, and then on the external dial, the lowest setting, I guess, looks like it was going to be 8. Now, if we used a 1/2 ounce plug, I might have been able to engage that long cast mode, and maybe the results will be different. But once again, this year, the Casting Olympics focuses on lighter lures or weights. But for all you fanboys, you can say that the T3 Ballistic did beat the Shimano SLX DC. Okay, so coming in 6th place is the very expensive JDM Abu Garcia REVO DEES 8 with an average of 148.16 feet. Now, the brake settings for the D's were as follows: spool tension set to just minimize side-to-side play, and the brakes were set to here, which I believe, according to my notes, let me take a look. Well, actually I don't have any notes, but the external dial was set to here. Now, typical of Magtrax brake systems, they don't really lend themselves to super long distance casting because of the static nature. But I really thought the D's 8 would average over 150 foot per cast, and maybe on a different day it would. Alright, so coming in 5th place and slaying several much more expensive giants is going to be the PISCIFUN Phantom. Now, the Phantom averaged 150.30 feet. So in my eyes, since this thing averaged over 50 yards per cast with a 1/4 ounce casting plug, I consider this thing to be an elite caster. Now, the brake settings for the Phantom were as follows: spool tension set to just minimize the side-to-side play. Internal centrifugal brakes, I was able to go down to 1, and then fine-tune the external magnetic brake to right here, a little bit past 8. So yeah, a $70 bait caster slayed the $300 REVO DEES 8, the $250 Daiwa T3 Ballistic, the $200 SLX DC, and the $300 Doyo Liger. Now, in my opinion, if this reel had a much shallower spool, it could have done a lot better because the spool is so tall. but maybe that's something PISCIFUN will work on in the next generation of this reel, or their next top-end baitcaster. Now, for all you guys who are wondering, PISCIFUN has sent me their new Alloy M baitcaster, and I'll be doing a couple of videos on that in the near future, so you may want to watch out for that. But once again, PISCIFUN Phantom, the second cheapest reel here, comes in 5th place. Alright, so coming in 4th place and just barely missing out on making it to the championship round is the Speed Demon Elite from KASTKING. Now, the Speed Demon Elite averaged an elite 150.52 feet, but let me tell you how it got there. Now, let's talk about the brake settings first. Now, the spool tension was set to where when I pressed the thumb bar, the casting plug would fall slowly, and when it hit the ground, there were a couple of overruns on the spool. Now, internally, I was able to go down to 3 brake shoes on, 3 off, and then I guess 8 on the external dial. But let's talk about that for a moment. Now, if you watch the casting impressions video I did on this reel, the reel was very inconsistent. It seemed to cast far 1 minute, and then it didn't seem to cast that far the next cast, and it was finicky at times. And let me show you why that is. I finally figured it out. Alright, so here's the spool. Now, I know KASTKING made a change to this brake hub color to red, but I'm not sure if they knew about these other issues or if it's just my reel that's doing it. But remember how I said that there were 3 brakes on and 3 brakes off? Well, the first issue is that these brake shoes are way too thin. They don't provide near enough surface area to really slow the spool down as good as it should. And it's very similar to their Assassin reel that I reviewed. Very finicky brakes, not strong enough, and definitely needs thicker brake shoes for more surface area to rub up against this ring. Now, the second thing, and this is very important, is that I would make a cast and it would put up a good number, and then the second cast, it would be really, really short. And basically what was happening was, during a hard cast, some of these brake shoes that were off would turn themselves on. So I'd make a cast with 3 brakes on, and then when I would make the next cast, apparently either 4 or 5 brakes were turned on, really choking off the next cast. So basically, for the Speed Demon Elite, after every cast, I would open up the reel and make sure only 3 brake shoes were activated. So I don't know if KASTKING is aware of that issue or if it's an issue with other Speed Demon Elites, but yeah, that's what was going on with my particular reel. So if they just gave this reel bigger brake shoes and fixed that issue with whatever is holding the brakes on and off, then this reel definitely has a lot of potential. Okay, so now it's time to get to the nitty-gritty, and these last 3 reels are the reels that will face the METANIUM in the final championship round. Now, coming in 3rd place is the new 2021 Daiwa ZILLION 1000 with an average of 153.72 feet, so well clear of the Speed Demon Elite. And yes, all you fanboys can unpucker your buttholes now. The new ZILLION made it into the championship round. Now, the brake setup for the ZILLION was pretty easy. Of course, I left the 0 adjuster alone, and the external dial I was able to go down to number 4. So the ZILLION will finally get a chance at revenge against the mighty METANIUM MGL. But there were 2 other reels that beat this ZILLION, and let's get to them now. Okay, so remember that mystery reel I showed you guys earlier in the video? Well, that reel came in 2nd place with a very elite average of 155 feet even. Now, some of you guys may have figured out what reel it was, but in case you didn't, it is the JDM Shimano Bass Rise. And this is one of the bigger, more hilarious surprises of this test. And let me explain why. Now, the first thing is that this is the cheapest Shimano baitcaster in the world. If you're in Japan, I believe you can pick this reel up for like $40. Now, the second thing is that this reel only has 1 ball bearing. Everything else is nylon bushings. So it's not, you know, fancy polymer bushings. They're just nylon or plastic or whatever. And let me show you. So I'm not sure where the one bearing is, but it's definitely not on the spool. But there's your nylon plastic bushing. It's got a very pretty blue color, but yeah, I'm not sure where that single ball bearing is. But then you got this basic Shimano static magnetic system. And a lot of you guys with the older KS might be familiar with this. But yeah, this is not a fancy FTB system. It's not a DC system. You know, it's not SVS or VBS. It's just a basic static magnetic system with 6 brake magnets. Now the brake setting for the Bass Rise was as follows. Spool tension set to just minimize side-to-side play. And I was able to go down 13 clicks for maximum for the Bass Rise. But check out the way these brakes work. So normally in mag track systems like you'll find in Abu Garcia's, they'll move these brakes further or closer to the spool for more or less braking. But with Shimano's Bass Rise, these things tilt and pivot. So for less braking, they kind of tilt and pivot like so. And yeah, that's pretty cool. I featured this in the previous Bass Rise, but who knew that this system would be so effective? Plus the fact that, you know, it's just using cheap nylon bushings. Yeah, the Shimano Bass Rise, a $40 bait caster, makes it into the championship round. Okay then, so that leaves only one more reel, and I know a lot of you guys are gonna hate this, but the winner of the first round of the 2021 Casting Olympics is gonna be 13 Fishing's Concept Boss. And this reel averaged 156.52 feet, so barely just nipping out the Bass Rise. Now I suspect if it had a bigger, more standard 34mm spool, that it would have definitely casted farther. But pretty impressive for the Boss. But considering this is a $400 reel, I was hoping it would do good. Now the brake settings for the Boss were as follows. Spool tension was set to a slow fall of the plug, and once the plug hit the ground, there were a couple of loops on the spool. And internally, I believe the brake setting was on number 3. Let me check my notes. Yep, according to my notes, internally the brakes were set to number 3. So literally the most expensive reel in this first round is the winner. So good on 13 Fishing, because if you watch the analysis video I did on this reel got a whole lot of hate. It's kind of funny, but yeah, this warrants a standalone casting impressions video, which was something I was gonna do but didn't have the time. But now I'm gonna do it because it won this first round. Now in case you didn't know, this reel is known for not having any bearings, just like the Bass Rise. It's got the super hard polymer bushings right there, and these are the 2nd generation CZB bushings. So yeah, the Concept Boss makes it into the championship round and beats all the other reels, and there was some stiff competition that it had to go up against. Okay, so the first round is all said and done, and it looks like the final 4 reels are going to be the Shimano Bass Rise versus the Daiwa ZILLION versus the 13 Fishing Concept Boss, taking on the mighty METANIUM MGL, the current and reigning 1/4 ounce casting plug king. Now I'm not sure what lure I'm going to cast yet. I know it's going to be something light and probably a weightless plastic of some sort. Not sure if I want to use a 4-inch Senko, but you'll see here at the end. But before we get into the final round, let's go over some interesting notes here. Now the first thing is that I want to say good job by KASTKING and PISCIFUN, as those are fairly new brands, and it shows that you don't have to be an old established brand to create a great performing reel. And the last note and the most interesting thing about the results is that the 1st and 2nd place reel don't use ball bearings. At least on their spools, they both use bushings. So maybe they're onto something, who knows? And maybe one of these reels will win the championship round. But with that said, let's get to the casting footage. Okay, so all the casts are done, and before we get to the results, since I only had 4 reels to battle, I upped the cast count to 5, and I did spend a considerable amount of time tweaking each reel, doing pre-measurements, etc, etc. And let's get to these results. Now, in case you didn't see, the lure I opted to cast was the weightless Zoom Super Fluke with 3/0 EWG Lightwire Gamakatsu hook, and this weighs a total of like 9 grams, so pretty lightweight. It's well under 3/8 of an ounce and a little bit over 1/4 of an ounce, but it's a lure that definitely does need casting distance. All right, let's get to these results. Now, coming in last place is going to be the 13 Fishing Concept Boss with an average of 96.7 feet. So the Concept Boss went from winning the first round to coming in last in this championship round. Now let's talk about the Boss for a second. Now it did do a practice cast of 116 feet, but unfortunately when it came down to the actual recorded cast, it couldn't even come close to that for some reason. And I spent a good 30 minutes at least tweaking the inside brakes and messing around with the spool tension, trying to get it to repeat that, because if it could repeat those casts, this thing would have possibly won this whole thing. But unfortunately for the Concept Boss, it comes in last place. So that means you fanboys can once again unpucker your buttholes. Alright, coming in third place is going to be the Shimano Bass Rise with an average of 104.58 feet. So basically coming into this contest, this reel had absolutely zero to lose, It's the cheapest reel here by far when it comes to price and specifications, but sometimes the performance of a reel is more than the sum of its parts. So a great showing for the Shimano Bass Rise. And for those of you who are wondering and have been emailing me, I do have the newest competitor for the Bass Rise from Daiwa, the PR100, on its way to me as we speak. Alright, so let's take these two reels out of the way. And it comes down to either the mighty METANIUM MGL or Daiwa's latest and greatest ZILLION 1000. And coming in second place is the ZILLION 1000 with an average of 107.86 feet. So a good showing by the ZILLION. It pretty much beat all comers except for the METANIUM. And I still have the on the water casting impressions video of this reel coming up, as well as a comparison with the Daiwa STEEZ. So be on the lookout for that. So that means the winner of the 2021 Casting Olympics is the mighty METANIUM MGL, and this reel averaged 114.26 feet. So it easily beat out these other reels, and if you're shocked by that, don't be, because these Shimano MGL spool reels are probably the best reels in the world when it comes to casting and pitching weightless plastics. I mean, the mid-range CHRONARCH MGL averaged over 50 yards a cast with a weightless 5-inch Senko. So yeah, there we go. The 2020 METANIUM MGL once again lives up to its reputation as being a monster caster. So okay guys, I hope you enjoyed this year's Casting Olympics. It was the biggest cast battle I've ever done so far, and I am definitely going to be doing it again next year. Alright guys, thanks a lot.